Hello there, welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Galaxy, where humans face the unknown, outsmart the impossible, and turn every test into victory. So sit back and let the story begin.
The first thing Darren heard was the sound of metal folding. Not an explosion, not an alarm, just that deep, low groan of a ship doing something it was never designed to do. He had heard sounds like that before, on mountain faces when the ice began to shift. He knew what it meant. He stopped what he was doing, grabbed the support beam beside him, and wrapped his arms around it. 3 seconds later, the whole world tilted. The cargo hold became a tumbling box of noise and light. Crates broke loose. Someone was screaming in a language he did not understand. Darren pressed his face against his arm, kept his grip, and held on. The ship hit something, bounced, hit again. Then silence. He opened his eyes. The hold was still. Smoke was coming from a cracked panel near the far wall. One of the emergency lights was blinking. Everything else was dark. Darren let go of the beam slowly, testing his weight on each foot before he committed to standing. His left shoulder ached. His lip was cut. That was it. He was fine. He moved to the cargo door, pulled the manual release, and stepped outside. The ship had come down in a forest. Not a normal forest. The trees were tall and dark blue, with wide flat leaves that caught the light like mirrors. The ground was soft and wet. The air smelled like copper and rain. Above the tree line, the sky was a deep greenish gray, and two moons hung low on the horizon even though it was not yet dark. He heard moaning from the front section of the ship. Darren walked toward it. The passenger cabin had torn open along the left side. He could see straight in. There were aliens everywhere, some sitting against the walls, some still strapped in their seats, some trying to stand and failing. They were tall, four-armed, with blue-gray scaled skin. Vrithians. He had read about them in the observer briefing. He recognized the smaller ones too, Polhari, soft-bodied, their bioluminescent markings flickering in a pattern that probably meant distress. He stepped through the torn wall. Nobody paid attention to him at first. Then a tall Vrithian female turned and looked at him with amber eyes. Her uniform had a commander's mark on the shoulder. Her face was calm, but her movements were slow. "Human," she said. The translator on her collar clicked. "Darren Cole," he said. "I was in the cargo hold." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away and tried to give an order to someone across the cabin. Her voice was strong, but her legs were not. She grabbed the wall to stay upright. Darren saw Saya before he heard her. She was pinned under a support panel that had come down sideways across her legs. She was not screaming. She was working at it with both hands, quietly and methodically, the way sensible people do when they are hurt and need to stay focused. He crossed the cabin and lifted the panel off her. She looked up at him. "Thanks." She winced as she moved her legs. "Not broken," he guessed. "Bruised badly." "Can you walk?" he asked. "In a minute." She breathed through it. "Darren, listen. The atmosphere out there, it is breathable for us, but it is mildly toxic for Vrithians and Polhari. Not lethal immediately, but it will slow them down. Their oxygen filters are in the emergency supply crates, but the crates are somewhere in the back section. Their judgment is already affected. How long do the filters buy them? 6 hours each. We have maybe 40 filters total for 22 crew and passengers." She pushed herself to sitting. "Rescue signal range is limited from here. Could be 4 to 6 days before anyone comes." Darren did the math quietly. It was not good math. A loud voice cut across the cabin. He turned. A heavy-set Vrithian male in formal clothing was standing near the front, pointing and speaking in rapid clicks and tones. The commander was answering him. They were arguing. "That is Regent Voss," Saya said. "Senior council member. He outranks Soreth technically, but she is the ship's commander." She paused. "He is telling her they need to stay with the ship and broadcast a distress signal." Darren looked at the ship. The front section had a fire running along the lower hull. Slow now, but it was spreading. The smoke was thick and dark and going straight up through the tree canopy. He looked at the forest. The sun, or whatever this moon star was sinking. "How long until dark?" he asked. 3 hours. Maybe less. He walked back outside and listened. The forest was quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind that lives between predator sounds. He had heard it before in the Rockies, the silence that falls when everything is holding still and waiting. He found the emergency supply crates by following the small lights the Polhari used on their hands. 38 oxygen filters. He put them in a bag and slung it over his shoulder. Then he started helping people out of the wreck. Nobody asked him to. Regent Voss stopped him once, held up a hand, something about protocol about waiting. Darren looked at the fire on the hull, then kept moving. By the time everyone was outside, the sun was lower and the forest sounds had changed. Somewhere between the blue trees, something moved. Heavy and patient. Darren counted. 22 aliens. One injured human. Himself. He picked up a piece of broken hull metal and held it at his side. Not a great weapon. Better than nothing. The night was coming, and something out there already knew they were here. Regent Voss had a plan. He announced it while leaning against the side of the wreck, one hand pressed flat to the hull for support. His voice was steady. The translator on Sorith's collar caught his words and pushed them into trade speech so Darren could follow. Stay with the ship. Broadcast the distress signal from the emergency unit. Conserve the oxygen filters. Wait for rescue. Standard Galactic Council crash protocol, Voss said. Tested. Reliable. Non negociable. 14 of the 22 survivors were Vrithian crew, and they stood in a loose cluster behind their commander. Commander Sorith listened to Voss with her arms folded across her chest. She did not argue. She also did not look fully convinced. Darren waited for Voss to finish. Then he spoke. The ship is on fire, he said. The fire is contained, Voss said. It is not contained. It is slow. Darren pointed to the lower hull, where dark smoke was still rising. Slow fires and wreckage spread when the temperature drops at night. The smoke column is already visible above the trees. In this forest, that is a dinner bell. Voss looked at the smoke. He looked at Darren. You are an observer. Un non-combatant. You have no authority here. I'm also the only one standing upright without holding on to something, Darren said. He kept his voice flat. Not rude, just factual. The atmosphere is working on all of you. In 3 hours, half this group will not be able to walk. If we are still next to this wreck when that happens, we have a problem. Sorith said something to Voss in Vrithian. Voss answered sharply. Sorith went quiet. That was the end of the conversation. Darren did not argue further. He had learned a long time ago that there were moments when words were finished and only outcomes would make the point. He spent the next hour working alone. He scouted the perimeter in widening circles, moving quietly through the blue-leaf trees, reading the ground. He found a rock shelf 200 meters northeast, a natural raised platform about 4 meters high, backed by solid stone on 2 sides, with clear sight lines on the other 2. Dry, defensible, away from the smoke. He came back and tried one more time. Voss told him to stand aside. Darren stood aside. He distributed oxygen filters to the worst affected survivors, prioritizing the Polhari, whose bioluminescent markings had gone almost dark. Olu, the young medical aide, was the only one who thanked him. He was small even for a Polhari, with wide eyes and trembling hands. He moved carefully, the way people do when they are frightened but trying not to be. What is your name? Darren asked him. Olu. The word came through the translator, small and careful. Stay near me tonight, Darren said. Olu looked at him for a moment, then nodded once. When the dark came, it came fast. The green-gray sky turned black in under an hour. The bioluminescent markings of the Polhari gave a soft glow. The fire on the hull gave another. Between them, there was enough light to see the shapes standing just beyond the tree line. Darren counted 4, then 6, low to the ground, wide-shouldered, moving in a slow curve around the edge of the camp. He had seen pack hunters work before, wolves in winter, following a herd and reading for weakness. These things moved the same way. He picked up 3 pieces of broken hull and wrapped rags soaked in fuel around them. He lit the first one from the hull fire. Then he walked toward the nearest shape in the trees, holding the flame up and out. The shape stopped. He threw the torch. It hit the ground a meter in front of the shape and burst into a wider flame. The shape went backward fast. The others pulled back with it. Darren lit the second torch and walked the perimeter of the camp, setting fires at intervals. Not big ones. Just enough light, just enough heat to mark the boundary. He had done the same thing once for a lost hiking group in British Columbia. Different predators. Same principle. When he came back to the group, nobody spoke for a moment. Then one of the ref, because that was what they were, he had seen the description in the briefing material, came from the left. It had gone around the lights. It was fast, low, and it went straight for the cluster of Polhari near the hull. Darren was already moving. He hit the ref with the third torch full across its face. It screamed, a high, sharp sound, and pulled away. He stayed between it and the Polhari and held the flame steady. The ref circled once, twice, then retreated. Two of the Vrithian crew had fallen trying to reach the attack. They were not slow because they were cowards. They were slow because the air was taking them apart from the inside. Darren took a long breath. His hands were steady. His shoulder still ached from the crash. He looked up. Commander Soreth was standing 3 meters away. She had seen all of it. Her amber eyes were unreadable. She did not apologize. She did not change her expression. But when Darren turned and began organizing the survivors into a tighter group away from the burning hull, she did not stop him. And the next time he spoke, no one interrupted. Moving 22 sick aliens through an alien jungle at night was exactly as difficult as it sounded. Darren went first. He had torn strips from a cargo blanket and tied them around the trunks of trees at eye level as he walked, marking the path back to the rock shelf. The ground was soft but uneven. Roots broke the surface every few meters like traps. He cleared the worst ones with his boot, tested each stretch of ground before waving the group forward. Olu stayed at his side. The young Polhari had stopped trembling somewhere around the second hour after the ref attack, and now moved with a quiet, focused energy that Darren had come to recognize in certain people. The ones who were scared all the way through, but kept going anyway. Those were usually the ones who made it. Soreth walked behind them. She had given her oxygen filter to one of the injured Vrithian crew and was managing on open air, which Darren had not expected. Her movements were slow, but she kept pace. She said nothing. She watched everything. Regent Voss walked near the middle of the group. He had stopped issuing orders, which was either wisdom or exhaustion. Darren did not know which. Either way, the silence helped. The path Darren had scouted was 200 meters. It took 45 minutes. The rock shelf was exactly as he had left it. A wide, flat platform of dark stone raised above the forest floor, backed on two sides by a solid wall of rock that rose another 10 meters. The tree line was 20 meters out in every other direction, with open ground between. Nothing could approach without crossing open space. Darren got the Polhari settled first. They were the worst off, their markings dim, some sitting as soon as they reached the stone. He gave Olu 2 spare filters and told him in simple words what to watch for: shallow breathing, disorientation, inability to respond to sound. Olu listened carefully and repeated it back correctly. Then Darren walked the edge of the rock shelf and laid a second fire line. He used with this time, not fuel-soaked cloth, better for a long burn. He found dry branches under the overhang of the rock wall and arranged them in 3 small piles at the corners of the shelf's open sides. He lit them from the last torch and stood back. The light pushed the dark back 20 meters on each side. Behind him, one of the Vrithian crew said something. He heard Soreth answer. He did not ask for a translation. He was too busy watching the trees. After a while, Olu came and stood beside him. "The signal from the ship," Olu said. "It was broadcasting before we left. I checked. Good. Rescue response time from a nearest relay point is 4 to 6 days." Olu paused. If the signal was received. If Darren said, "Yes." Olu was quiet for a moment. "How many filters do we have left?" Darren had already counted. 31. 18 Vrithian, 6 Polhari above what you are already using, 7 spare. He did the math out loud. At 6 hours per filter, we need to rotate carefully. If we double the rotation on the worst affected and keep the ones who can tolerate the air on reduced use, we can stretch it to 7 days. Olu's marking shifted, something in the blue range. Darren had not learned enough about Polhari to read it fully, but the young alien's posture relaxed slightly. "You calculated that fast," Olu said. "Rationing is rationing," Darren said. "I have done it before. Different circumstances. On your planet, on my planet." Olu seemed to think about that. Then he said, "Is it true that humans evolved on a high-gravity world with extreme temperature variation and no chemical atmospheric support?" "We evolved on Earth," Darren said, "which is yes to all of those things." Olu's markings shifted again. Darren was starting to think blue might mean something like wonder. Across the rock shelf, Regent Voss had lowered himself to sitting against the stone wall. In the firelight, the dignity he had worn like armor on the ship looked thinner. He was just a large alien who was cold and sick and far from home. Darren had seen that look before, too, on people pulled off mountains in the dark. It was the look that came after the pride burned off. Sorith came and stood near Darren without announcing herself. "The Wrath," she said. "Will they follow us here?" "They already know where we are," Darren said. "But this position is harder for them. No cover on the approach. They prefer ambush." He gestured at the open ground in front of the shelf. "They will test it, probably tomorrow night, once they have watched us for a day. And you will do what you did before." "I will do whatever works," Darren said. Sorith was quiet for a long moment. The fire popped. One of the Polhari made a soft sound in their sleep. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her. She was not asking why he was defending them. She was asking something else. Something harder to translate. Why him? Why this? Why did he not simply stay in the wreck and make his own decisions about survival? Darren thought about that. "Because I can," he said. "And right now, no one else can." Sorith held his gaze. Then she turned and went back to check on her crew. Darren stayed on watch until the second moon rose. The jungle stayed quiet. But quiet, he had already learned, meant nothing here. By the second morning, 3 of the survivors could not stand. 2 Polhari and 1 young Vrithian crew member were flat on the stone, breathing through their filters in slow, measured pulls. The atmospheric toxicity had done what Saya had warned about, settled into their systems, and begun dismantling fine motor function. Their hands shook. Their eyes tracked poorly. Darren checked each of them the way he had been trained to check injured hikers. Pulse, pupils, skin temperature, grip strength. He had no proper medical equipment. He had a first aid kit from the emergency crate, a knife, and 15 years of doing this in places that did not come with hospitals nearby. Olu followed him through each check, watching carefully, asking 1 or 2 questions in his quiet way. He was a medical aide, not a doctor, but he was thorough and he did not panic. "We need to buy time for the filters," Darren said. "If we can reduce the ambient exposure for the worst cases, 1 filter might last 12 hours instead of 6. "Ow?" Olu asked. Darren had been thinking about it since the second moon set. "Shelter, sealed or close to it. If we build a covered space against the rock wall and bank the fire on the outside, we can trap cleaner air inside. Not perfect, but better." Olu's markings went a thoughtful gray. "We have no materials. We have the forest." That was how Darren spent the first half of the second day. He cut wide, flat leaves from the nearest trees, the ones with the mirror-like surfaces, which he had already noticed seemed to resist moisture, and built a lean-to frame against the stone wall using branches and strips of cargo rope. The 3 worst affected were moved inside it. 2 of the Vrithian crew helped him once he showed them what shape he needed. They worked without talking. That suited Darren fine. Midday. Saya was sitting up on her own now, back against the stone, her xenobiology kit open in her lap. "Come look at this," she called. He went over. She was holding a small sample cylinder containing sap from one of the blue trees. The sap was pale yellow, almost clear, and it smelled strongly of something medicinal, sharp and slightly bitter. "The Wrath did not approach within 3 meters of this tree line," Saya said. She tapped the cylinder. "I think this sap repels them. The chemical compound is close to something in the database, a natural deterrent found in prey species on the Vrithian homeworld." "You are sure?" Darren asked. "No," she said, "but I am interested." He looked at the sap. Then he took the cylinder, walked to the tree line, and rubbed a line of sap across his wrist. Then he waited. Olu made a small sound behind him. Saya said his name sharply. Nothing happened. The sap dried fast and left a faint residue on his skin. The forest beyond the tree line stayed still. "Okay," Darren said. He came back. "Let us work out how much we can harvest." It took 3 hours. By the end, Darren and Saya had a workable deterrent, sap mixed with water from the emergency supply to stretch the volume, applied to the outer edge of the rock shelf perimeter with strips of cloth. Not a wall, not a guarantee, but if it cut the Wraith's willingness to approach, it changed the calculation for tonight. Commander Soreth had watched the entire process from across the shelf. Now she walked over. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked. "Combination of things," Darren said. "Field medicine, environmental assessment, some chemistry from a long time ago." He wiped his hands on his trousers. "We used similar approaches in wilderness rescue. You work with what the landscape gives you." Soreth was quiet for a moment. "On my world, identifying, testing, and producing a chemical deterrent from raw materials would require a specialist team. Equipment. Weeks." "I did not have weeks," Darren said. "No." She looked at him steadily. "You did not." A sound from the far side of the shelf. Regent Voss, shifting against the wall, adjusting his filter. He had been quiet all day, not asleep, watching. His eyes tracked every movement Darren made, but his expression was unreadable. Late afternoon, one of the Wraith appeared at the tree line. It was alone, which was unusual. Darren stood up slowly and walked to the edge of the shelf. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood there and looked at it. Direct eye contact, still, weight forward on his feet. The Wraith looked back at him for a long time. Then it turned and walked back into the forest. Olu exhaled slowly behind him. "You knew it would leave?" Olu asked. "I hope," Darren said. Olu sat down on the stone beside him. His markings were doing the blue thing again. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Is your whole planet like this?" Dangerous things everywhere. Predators. Bad weather. Toxic environments. He paused. "How do your people survive it?" Darren sat down beside him. He thought about the Rockies in winter, about 6-hour carries through whiteout conditions, about the first time he had talked a panicking man down from a ledge at 2 in the morning with frostbite on both hands. "We survive it by doing it," he said, "and then doing it again." Olu thought about that for a while. "That is either very simple," Olu said, "or very frightening." "Both," Darren said. "Usually both." The sun dropped. The forest went dark. Somewhere out there, the Wraith were moving. Darren stood up and went to check the fires. Darren had set 3 fire lines, applied the sap deterrent twice along the eastern edge, and organized the Vrithian crew members well enough to walk into 2-person watch rotations. He had done everything he could think of. It was not enough. The Wraith came at the 3rd hour of dark. Not 1 or 2. A full pack, moving in the coordinated fan spread of experienced hunters. He counted 6 before they split into 2 groups, and the counting became difficult. Half from the south, cutting around the fire line. Half from the north, where the deterrent had already dried and lost most of its strength. He shouted a warning. The watch pair on the north side, 2 Vrithian crew members named in a language his mouth could not reproduce, moved fast and did the right thing. They threw their torches out and held position. The southern group hit the sap line and pulled back, exactly as hoped. For 30 seconds, it looked like the preparation would hold. Then one Wraith, bigger than the others, moving lower and faster, came from the west, where there was no crew member and no deterrent. It had circled completely. It had been patient enough to wait for the gap. It went for Regent Voss. Darren did not think about it. He was already running. Voss was slow and disoriented from the atmosphere. He had pushed himself to standing when the alarm went up, but he was leaning on the rock wall, and his reactions were half speed. The Wraith was 10 meters out and closing when Darren cut across its path. He had his rescue knife in his right hand and a burning branch in his left. He swung the branch at the Wraith's face. It flinched sideways. He stayed between it and Voss, backing Voss against the wall without taking his eyes off the animal. The Wraith circled. It was large. Up close, the size was different for what the briefing material had suggested. Compact and low, with a wide head and short, powerful legs and eyes that caught the firelight and threw it back amber. It did not look afraid. It looked calculating. Darren had dealt with calculating animals before. He planted his feet wide. He held the burning branch at full extension, flame forward. He did not advance, and he did not retreat. He made himself take up as much space as possible, shoulders back, chin up, making direct eye contact. In the Rockies, they taught you to make yourself big for bears. He did not know if it worked on Wraith. He He made himself big anyway. The wreath fainted left. He turned with it. It fainted right. He turned with it. Then it came forward. It went for his left side, the side with the branch. He pulled the branch back and brought the knife forward and opened a shallow cut along its right shoulder. The wreath screamed, that high sharp sound again, and swept its forelimb outward. The claws caught his left arm. He felt it tear, not a surface scratch. Deep below the elbow, hot and immediate. He stepped back hard against the wall beside Voss, put his back to the stone, and held the burning branch up between himself and the wreath. The wreath stood still. Blood was coming from its shoulder where the knife had caught it. Blood was running down Darren's arm onto the stone. Neither of them moved. Then one of the other wreath made a sound, a short, low bark, and the large one broke eye contact and walked backward 3 steps. Then turned. Then was gone into the dark with the rest of the pack. Darren lowered the branch slowly. He looked at his arm. The cuts were 4 lines, each about 5 centimeters long, running from elbow to mid-forearm, bleeding steadily. He pressed his right hand over them and held it. Olu was there in seconds. His markings were flickering rapidly, the distress pattern Darren had seen on the first night. His hands went to the wound, feeling carefully, pressing where the bleeding was worst. "I need the kit," Olu said to no one specifically. It appeared quickly. Darren sat down on the stone and let Olu work. His arm hurt properly now. The shock buffer was wearing off, which meant the injury was not catastrophic. Catastrophic injuries did not hurt the same way. "Stay still," Olu said. His hands were shaking. "I know," Darren said. "You're doing fine." "I'm not doing fine. You are cleaning a wound under field conditions with adequate materials and correct pressure technique," Darren said. "That is fine." Olu made a sound that the translator did not catch, but that probably meant something like "stop being calm right now." Darren almost smiled. Regent Voss was sitting against the wall 2 meters away. He had not spoken since the attack. He watched Olu work on Darren's arm without expression. His breathing had slowed. The firelight caught the lines of his face. When Olu tied off the bandage, Voss spoke. "I did not know," he said slowly. "I did not know that humans were like this." Darren looked at him. "Most of us are," Darren said. "You just never needed to find out before." Voss held his gaze for a long moment. Then he looked away and said nothing more. Darren flexed his bandaged hand carefully. Functional. Painful, but functional. He stood up and went back to the edge of the shelf. The forest was quiet again. Not peaceful, just waiting the way it always was. He stood there in the dark with a burning branch in his good hand and watched until the second moon broke through the canopy. Nobody told him to keep watch. Nobody needed to. The rescue ship came on the 5th day, just before noon. Darren heard the engines first, a low, steady vibration that traveled through the rock shelf before it reached the air. He had been sitting with his back to the stone wall, his bandaged arm resting in his lap, watching one of the Polhari sleep. He stood up slowly, looked at the sky, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Get everyone up." The ship was a Galactic Council emergency vessel. White-hulled, large, dropping fast through the green-gray sky with the kind of precision that meant experienced crew and good navigation data. It found the clearing near the rock shelf and landed without drama. The first crew member out of the hatch stopped when they saw the group. They stood still and looked. 22 survivors, all alive, some shaky, some pale, some barely holding upright, but alive, breathing on their feet or supported by those who still could stand. The council crew members said something in a clipped, fast voice that the translators barely caught. Then more crew came out, and the organized chaos of medical recovery began. Darren stepped back and let it happen. There were people who knew how to do this part. He was not one of them. He sat on a rock shelf and watched Olu direct the medical crew toward the worst affected. Watched Soreth give her first real debrief in clipped Vrithian that the translator struggled to keep up with. Watched the Polhari being helped aboard with blankets and clean air equipment. His arm hurt. His shoulders still ached from the crash. He was hungry enough that his hands felt light. One of the rescue crew crouched in front of him and said something. "I am fine," Darren said. "Deal with the others first." The crew member looked at the bandage on his arm and said something firmer. "After the others," Darren said. The crew member went away and came back 5 minutes later with a medical kit. Darren accepted this without further argument. Aboard the rescue ship, the debrief started before anyone had fully eaten. That was the way of official things. Darren answered questions for an hour, gave his account in plain language, was asked to repeat certain parts twice, and then was left alone in a small room with a food tray and a window. He ate everything on the tray. Then he sat and looked out the window at the jungle moon they were leaving behind. Why? 7 Marin looked smaller from above. Calmer. The blue trees moved slowly in the upper wind layer, their mirror-like leaves catching the sun and throwing light back in long flickers. It was almost beautiful. Darren watched it until the ship had climbed high enough that the surface blurred. The door opened. Olu came in. He looked better. Clean, rested, his markings back to their normal brightness. He sat down across from Darren and put his hands on the table. Commander Sorith gave a report. Olu said, "I know. I was there for part of it." She stated on official record that survival of all passengers and crew was due to your decisions and actions. Olu's markings shifted. She was specific about it. She listed what you did. Each thing. Darren said nothing. Regent Voss also gave a statement. Olu continued. Voluntarily. He said the Council has consistently underestimated the capabilities of the human species because humans do not announce those capabilities. Olu paused. He said that was an error in judgment. He used the word error specifically. That must have cost him something, Darren said. I think it did. Olu agreed. Darren looked back at the window. The moon was a small shape now, disappearing in the haze. The infection in his arm had been treated properly. His shoulder had been checked. He was intact. Everyone was intact. 4 or 5 days on a moon that the rescue crew had looked up quietly on their own database and then looked at each other with an expression that said everything. Everyone had made it out. Olu was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "On my world, there's a word for someone who stands between those who cannot protect themselves and whatever is trying to reach them." Darren waited. "It is a very old word," Olu said. "We do not use it often because the quality it describes is rare. We had a name for it, and most of us thought it only existed in old stories." He looked at Darren steadily. "I did not expect to find it in a human," Olu said. "I did not know to look for it there." Darren did not have an answer for that. He was not a man who collected moments like that and held them. He looked at Olu for a moment, then nodded once. "Get some rest," Darren said. "You did well down there." Olu stood up. At the door, he paused. "Will I see you again?" "After the debrief. After the reports." Darren thought about it. There'd be a full council inquiry. Jurisdiction arguments. Probably 6 months of paperwork. His supervisor at the rescue service was going to have strong opinions about the whole thing. "Probably," he said. Olu's markings went bright blue. The door closed. Darren turned back to the window. The moon was gone now. Just stars and the long dark between them. He was already thinking about the inquiry, the forms, the flight home. His sister would call. His team lead would call louder. The galaxy was strange and enormous, and sometimes it tried to kill you without any warning at all. He had been handling things like that his whole life. He picked up the last piece of food from the tray and finished it. Then he closed his eyes and slept.